Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to The Upside. I'm Jonathan Oleski with JMOR, and this is our virtual show brought to you by the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore and JMOR Magazine. Now, if you have questions for today's guests, and they are going to be fabulous, they really are, please type them into the Zoom chat or message us on JMOR's Facebook page. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our host for today, Beth Goldsmith, chair of the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore, and actually Dr. Scott Rifkin, publisher of JMOR, has the day off, so I'll be jumping in and helping Beth with the questions. Beth, go ahead and take it away. Oh, I think we're waiting for Beth to get unmuted.
Okay,
there you go, Beth.
I just got muted. Okay, but I apologize. I missed even the opening. I am having connectivity issues, so if I disappear, please just take it up for me, Jonathan.
You bet, Beth.
So today we're excited to talk about the baseball season. It opened last Thursday, and the Orioles kicked it off with a sweep of the Boston Red Sox. Despite a loss yesterday, they are still sitting atop the AL East. So the question is, can Orioles fans, I guess, hold out hope that this year could be different? Well, according to Fangraphs, a statistics and analysis site, they gave the team an unprecedented 0% chance of making the playoffs. As we open up our season at Oriole Park at Camden Yards on Thursday, what should Baltimore baseball fans expect this year? Jonathan, you want to introduce our guests?
You bet. So I am very excited to introduce two outstanding gentlemen, two sports enthusiasts, two sports experts, Stan Charles and Gary Stein. Stan and Gary, take it away, gentlemen.
Well, we're happy to take it away. If the question is as simple as, do the Orioles have zero chance to make the playoffs? I'd say they probably have slightly better chance than zero, but not a lot of chances above maybe getting hit by lightning or something like that.
Funny.
The Orioles they're a work in progress. And certainly it's nice to get off to a start like that, the way they did against Boston. But this is another building season. And the most interesting thing for me to watch this season is to see how many of these kids that are both in the major leagues, like Ryan Mountcastle, Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins, really take and start to show that they're major league ready, and how many of the guys that are at that alternate training site that will make up the Norfolk team when they start playing in a month, how many of those people can make the jump this year? Also to keep an eye on is whether or not the club trades a couple high-priced players for them, but relatively cheap players in outfielder Anthony Santander and Trey Mancini. Those are some of the things I'll be watching most closely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, any reasonable person would not expect the Orioles to do much this year. Contend for the pennant, I think, would be out of the question, meaning that they would be playing meaningful baseball in August and September. I think that that's a little bit unrealistic. Having said that, hope springs eternal. Last year, the COVID season, 60 games, whatever it was, Stan, you probably know the number better than I, kind of, in my mind, leveled the playing field a little bit more, because, everything's been disjointed with baseball, with sports in general, but baseball in particular, because it wasn't a real season last year. It wasn't a real spring training last year. So there's a lot of catching up to do and recalibrating and all that kind of stuff. So I think the playing field is a little bit more even, but baseball is the one sport that evens things out at the end, because it's 162 games. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so I think, realistically speaking, let's enjoy it game by game, but let's not get too caught up in it right at the moment.
I want to jump in. Stan, you mentioned Trey Mancini, and as we know, he's been fighting colon cancer, and we're so happy to have him back. How is he doing, and what can we expect from him this year?
That's a great question, Beth. Trey, number one, knock on wood, is cancer-free as of the moment. I'm sure he's on a regimen of being tested quite frequently, having blood work done, and to stay on top of this. It was a tremendous shock, even though he's got the genetics. His father had colon cancer at the age of 55. As you know, it's highly unusual for somebody in their 20s to come down with colon cancer. But right now he's healthy, his head's in a good space, and he's been able to work his way back into the physical condition he needs to play the rigors of a 162 game schedule. I alluded to the fact, because I just wrote a column for the new press box that'll be out in about 10 days, that I think, although we assume that the ball club is going to trade Trey Mancini if it can, I think they should do just the opposite. And I think they should find some happy medium of sort of guaranteeing him some fiscal certainty in his life, but paying him and keeping him around Baltimore for 4 or 5 more years. I think it would really help energize the fan base a good bit here in town.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree.
Talk a little bit about, do some prognosticating, gentlemen. I mean, who's going to win the division? Who are some of the best teams right now? Who do you think we'll be seeing in the World Series? I know that's a hard one, but if you have, what do you think?
I think the Dodgers are far and away the best team in Major League Baseball, and they got even better last night because the star shortstop of the San Diego Padres, while he was swinging his bat, he had what's called a subluxation of his shoulder, which is
ouch.
It's a bit of a shoulder separation, and it wasn't like he was hit like Ray Lewis hit him. It was just from swinging a bat. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, and I didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night, but that sounds like it could be a couple-month procedure to get him back in playing shape. They were fortunate enough, they had signed a top Japanese shortstop to a free agency contract, so they probably have as good a replacement in place. But the Dodgers are by far the best team in baseball, and I think the Yankees are probably number 2 with the injury to Tatis right now.
Well, Stan, I wish I had gone first, because I would have said the exact same thing that you just said. I think the Dodgers are by far and away the best team in baseball. I like the Yankees in the American League East, for what they've been able to assemble. But I also like Toronto. I think last year, actually, the fact that they had to move around and play in, Buffalo and all that stuff, it kind of bonded them as a unit. And I think that will carry over to this year, obviously, at least in the early part of the year. And I like what they've assembled. So I think
they're going to play, by the way, Gary, not to interrupt you, but they're going to play the first at least 4 to 6 weeks in Dunedin, Florida. Their home, their spring training home, which only seats probably about 7,000 people. And of course, Governor DeSantis down there will be happy to have 12,000 fans there. But they're going to play in Dunedin, Florida, and then maybe in June, again, move to Buffalo. They can't play in their home city of Toronto right now.
Right, and more than likely they won't be able to play at all this year. We'll see if that changes come September, whatever. But I like Toronto, though, in the American League East. So I think the 3 best teams, and I wouldn't discount Houston also, by the way, but I think the 3 best teams are coming out of the NL West with the Dodgers, and then the Yankees and Toronto probably from the American League East.
Thanks, guys. I want to jump in again, Stan. You mentioned the audience, you mentioned fans and numbers. What can fans expect this year?
You mean what can we expect in terms of seeing fans at games?
Absolutely. If I want to go, what should I be prepared for?
Well, I'm not quite sure myself yet, because I'm not going to go immediately, because the number of media people is very low right now, and I don't want to further tax them. It's not essential that I be there, and that's the interesting thing for media. I know some of the media feels they have to show up, but there's absolutely no advantage for a media member to be at a game. He's not going to get any one-on-one time with Brandon Hyde or the players or the coaches. But for fans, there's certainly going to be fans that want to go to the games. I urge them to go to the BaltimoreOrioles.com to read up on what you have to do to go to a game. I believe they're going to sell about 10,000. Is that the number, Gary? Is it 10,000 seats a game?
I think it's 10 or 11.
10 or 11,000 seats a game. But there are certain things you're not going to be able to bring in food items. But some of the concession stands will be open. They will not take cash. It's going to be a cashless transaction, which I think sports was working towards anyway. Frankly, I think it was going to go all electronic even before the pandemic occurred. But there'll be some other changes, and they will, of course, space people out so you're not on top of people. I think, frankly, and I know this has become such a political hot button, but the notion that Texas allowed a stadium to have 100% capacity yesterday is absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, 40,000. I think I don't even know what the new stadium is called, Stanley. Do you?
Is it Globe? I think it's still got the same sponsor name, Globe Life Park.
It's possible. The point being, obviously, guys, Texas has opened up. For better or for worse, they're open. Florida's open. Many, if not most, southern states are starting to do that. I do think it's irresponsible. Like Stan, I am reticent about going to an Oriole game right now with only 10,000 people in the stands. I'm not even talking about being a media member. I'm talking about going to the game as a fan. It'll be interesting once we go. I think that the pandemic actually pushed Major League Baseball's timetable up. As Stan said, they were going to, ticketless, entrance. They were going towards contactless, buying concessions, etc. So I think that just pushed that timetable up. It'll be an interesting experience, especially on a beautiful summer day, to be able to sit in the seats and not be all crowded in and everything. But I think we would all agree that in the best possible scenario, there's nothing like 45,000 fans at an Oriole game, rooting the team on like it used to be back in the salad days. But that's not going to happen for a while, so we're just going to have to get used to it.
Absolutely. Hey, some good news. So we have some questions that are coming in from Facebook because it's about sports and everyone's dying to talk about sports. So let's start with, here we go. Hi, Stan and Gary. This is from Michael on the Associated's Facebook page. How unique is Ohtani, and should we appreciate him more?
Great question.
Gary, I'll grab that. First of all, Billy Ripken, the ex-Baltimore Oriole, made a really fascinating comment on MLB TV about 3 weeks ago, and I think he's absolutely right. Shohei Ohtani is such a great player. He's an unbelievable hitter, and I'm really now just starting to appreciate what kind of power this guy has. It's absolutely remarkable, and he's an incredible pitcher. But the notion that he is so max effort on every pitch, and he's already had Tommy John surgery, and that's not like a guarantee that you won't have elbow problems again just because you've had Tommy John surgery. I think he would be a much more dangerous weapon if Joe Madden, the manager of the Angels, would simply call him out of the dugout in the 8th or 9th inning, put him into games as a relief pitcher, almost like a chess piece, almost like a rook that can take things out. And I think that would be really fascinating to watch. And I think that's where his real value would be. It's not going to be as a starting pitcher. Although he's got fantastic stuff, I think he's going to burn out too much in every start.
After watching him play and after seeing some other athletes play dual sports, I'll talk about that in a minute. I don't think anything is necessarily impossible, but I think that Stan's right. I think the effort and the physicality that he puts into pitching, I don't see how he can last for the long haul. To answer the question specifically, absolutely, we should be appreciating this guy's athleticism. Absolutely, we should be watching and following everything that he does. But I just can't see it happening for the long haul. I can see him coming in the 7th or 8th inning as a, maybe not a closer, but as a setup guy and still continue to bat the way that he does. I think it's harder to pitch and hit at a high level in baseball than it's actually to play dual sports. I consider Bo Jackson to be the greatest athlete ever, simply because he was able to be an all-star in baseball and would have been an all-star in football had his career not lasted only 2 years. But I think it's easier for an athlete to actually do that than it is to be a starting top-notch pitcher in Major League Baseball and a star hitter.
All right, so now I'm really going to test your Jewish geography and Jewish sports trivia here. I'm teeing it up.
What are you going to ask me about Mike Epstein?
Well, here's the question from Michael on Facebook, who wants to know who some of your favorite all-time Jewish players are, and what have they meant to you all?
That's a good question.
I was a kid. When I was a kid, Willie Mays was my favorite baseball player, and I'm not going to convince you that he was Jewish. But so I loved the San Francisco Giants. They were my team. And grudgingly, over time, I realized that when I watched Sandy Koufax, I hated to admit he was better than Juan Marichal, but I still think that Sandy Koufax is the greatest pitcher I've ever seen, the most dominant pitcher. The one thing he didn't have was longevity of 12, 14 years, where he could have proven that with an exclamation point. But for the 6 or 7 years that he was the center of the rotation, he was absolutely incredible. Now, locally, I got to watch Steve Stone. My first or second year of my season tickets were behind home plate, and Steve is Jewish, and he won the Cy Young Award in 1980, winning 25 games, and that was a remarkable thing to watch. Gary, who are some of your favorite Jewish athletes?
Yeah, I mean, they're really, to be honest with you, not a whole hell of a lot of them, unfortunately, but that's just the way it goes. I'm a little bit younger than you, Stan, but I still was able to appreciate Sandy Koufax back in the day, not really at the beginning of his career, although towards the later part of his career, that's when he really got those Hall of Fame type numbers. Steve Stone was great, for certainly a couple of seasons. I wouldn't call him a flash in the pan necessarily, but the 1 year he had was obviously a little bit of an anomaly. But for me, I think being, reading biographies and just knowing the history of sports, I think two of the greatest influences or two of the best Jewish athletes that have great influence on their sports are Sid Luckman, the quarterback of the Chicago Bears, who George Halas took under his wing back in the 1940s. They brought in the T offense, which is now the base offense that most offenses use in the National Football League. It's hard to compare passing statistics from then to now because the game has obviously changed so much. But if you look back on it, Sid Luckman was a game changer, and then Johnny Unitas succeeded him as a game changer. And then there have been other quarterbacks afterwards. And then as far as baseball is concerned, I think it would be hard to go against Hank Greenberg, who had such an illustrious career in Major League Baseball with the Tigers. Locally, I would have to say, and I know, Stan, you know this guy, and I really like him a lot, Mark Greenberg, who played lacrosse for Johns Hopkins University, was a member of 4 national championship teams back in the late 1970s, and is considered, along with Dave Petramala, as 2 of the greatest defensemen ever in lacrosse history, would probably have to be somebody that I would look up to in terms of Jewish athletes.
Wow, I love this conversation, and we have so many topics that we can go to. Yeah. So please feel free throughout to weigh in on anything, guys, and bring us whatever else is happening. I'm gonna ask a question that's a little out of the ballpark.
Nicely done.
So the Orioles just re-signed a lease, good till 2023, but rumors are always out there that they may leave us. Thoughts?
I take John Angelos at his word that the Orioles will be in Baltimore as long as Fort McHenry is sort of, there to protect the nation. The Orioles are facing unprecedented. They have such a whiplash effect of the Freddie Gray riot and then the pandemic that they've sold so few tickets since 2016 or 17, that when the team got bad, it it just gave people no reason to really regularly go down and see Baltimore Oriole games. And the pandemic has frankly made it just sort of out of the ordinary to think about going to games. And it's going to be something new that the club has to engage fans to do. And that's why I wrote this piece on Trey Mancini. I think under normal circumstances, I could understand the Orioles taking an asset like Trey Mancini this year, Beth, and trading him because he's going to make a lot of money next year if he has a good year this year. He'll go from 4.75 up to about 10 or 11 million next year. And then if he has another good year, he'd be up in the 16, $17 million range, which is clearly the Orioles aren't going to be really ready to go in that range. But I think if they proactively sat down with Trey rather than ignore the issue, they could find the right number, which would be 4 years, 42, 44 million. I think it would be much better for them to keep a favorite here than just kind of do this rebuild and sort of check the boxes. Guys starting to make too much money, we have to trade them for younger, cheaper assets. I think the club would be well advised to do that. Gary, your thoughts?
I'm going to use a Jewish word, and I think we would all agree if the Orioles ever moved, it would be a shanda. And I don't even know if John Angelos knows that word, but he should. And maybe he does now. Having said that, I don't see it happening. We've been down this road before. What, Stan? We had 14 years where the Orioles were basically in the wilderness before Buck came and before, Andy McPhail and all that. So, we've weathered the storm before. Maybe the ticket sales were a little bit higher back then than they are now. I certainly understand it, but I think the expenses are lower. Look, I think Mike Elias is on the right track. I think he's going to get this team back on the right track. And I think you don't leave a crown jewel like Camden Yards, and you don't leave a town that you've been in for 60 years that's considered one of the greatest baseball cities in Baltimore, or I should say in the United States. So I think when it's all said and done, the lease will get figured out. The dispute with the Nationals will get figured out. Mike Elias will figure it out. It may not be tomorrow, but I think that it'll all get figured out. And I think great baseball viewed by sellout crowds will eventually come back to Camden Yards.
There we go. So here's another Facebook question for Stan and Gary from Jake in Charles Village. Will sports gambling be starting soon in Maryland? We're beginning to read about that in the media. What do you all think? Any insights?
Well, Gary and I do a sports Zoom on Wednesday nights on Facebook Live, and then we put it on our website at pressboxonline.com. And we've had Bill Lardine, who used to be our gaming writer. He now writes for a concern called gambling.com. We've had Jake Jacobs from Maryland Live Casino Hotel on a couple times. He's their vice president of marketing out there. It's coming. It's just that Maryland moves so damn slow. It's an insult to molasses to say that Maryland moves like molasses. It's coming. I'm hopeful because it's going to create a very interesting influx in our business at Pressbox because there's a lot of gaming concerns that are throwing a lot of money at customer acquisition through marketing. So it's going to be a little boon for Pressbox, I would think. So I'm hopeful that they'll get it in place by July or August this year. But the legislature is due to shut down in about a week or 10
Next
days.
week. Yeah.
Next week.
I haven't heard anything new that they're about ready to get the legislation in place. The voters have voted. Now the legislature is moving rather slowly. What's happening is, as we understand, there's never a piece of legislation that doesn't just cover what it's about. It's legislators then trying to attach what's known as pork to it to get, this thing done for their constituents and this thing. And suddenly the bill is no longer about what it's supposed to be about. So I'm hopeful they'll have something in place in August. It would not surprise me if we have to go through another legislative session next year. It's going to be up to Governor Hogan, I think, frankly, to call a special session in June or July to get this thing done.
I think it's a little bit optimistic to expect it to get done, as Stan says, by July or August. So I'm not expecting it to get done this year. What I am interested in, though, and Stan and I talked about this.
Would you bet on that, Gary? Would you bet on that?
I'll bet on it right now, guys.
Yeah.
What I think is the most interesting thing about it, though, and I'd like to hear your guys' opinion on it too, is, and Stan and I talked about this with Bill Ordine the other day, as he mentioned on that podcast. Think about the social interaction implications of what online gambling can do. Let's just say you're watching a game at Camden Yards, okay? Let's say there's 20, 25,000 fans in the seats. I don't know, it doesn't matter, okay? And you're able to bet online. You're able to do online gambling. And keep in mind, there's all these side bets that you can do. You can bet on the next pitch. Is it a ball or a strike? On the next batter, does he get a single? Does he strike out? A whole myriad of things that you're able to do. Imagine what the social interaction can be among fans who have conflicting bets coming up on the next pitch, the next batter, the next out, the next day, whatever it is. I'm really interested to see what happens in that type of situation. Stan, what do you think?
Well, first of all, it's very interesting. We have sort of a caricature of the old gambler, wearing the hat, smoking a cigar. That's not who casinos and online operations are going after now. They're going after, Jonathan, your kids.
Yeah,
right.
Your kids, Beth, your kids. I don't have any kids. I have a dog and a wife, but I don't have any kids.
They're going after the dogs.
But they're going after 25 to 45-year-olds. And it's absolutely stunning now to watch the Oriole pregame, the shortened Orioles Extra before Oriole games. They are always sponsored now by a gaming concern. FanDuel had it one day. Last night, DraftKings had it. And they actually bring in somebody, a young guy that must work for the casinos, and he's like spouting statistics. I can't even follow it, what he's talking about. And that's what their appeal is. And as Gary said, the myriad of proposition wagers that you're going to be able to take part in, it's going to be quite a different experience. But they're not aiming for me, in my late 60s. They're aiming for a much younger demographic.
I think that's good news, really, because that means we can actually sit and enjoy the game as opposed to being bombarded. Seriously, we have these jokes all the time. Like I have a 38-year-old son, and we went to a restaurant, and they happened to have had a live performance that night. And he was so busy videotaping it, he didn't really see it. And then the video was a little dark, and I'm there enjoying the thing because I don't have my phone out trying to capture it. I captured it in here. So
Good point. Yeah.
I do think that's an important thing.
Let
me just ask you guys.
I'm still stunned that Beth has a 38-year-old. What were you, about 14 when you had your son?
You know better than that. I was 32. Hey, I was just 71, and I'm proud of it. So
how funny.
71?
The first time I ever met Beth,
Funny.
you were wearing the Chesapeake.
Oh
you remember
gosh, yes.
The Chesapeake mascot at the Preakness.
At
the Preakness, yeah.
Right, that was my first 15 minutes of fame. I was on the Jazzmobile as Chester Peak, the national beer bird. That's real. Thank you for.
Wow, you guys go back.
Wow.
Yeah, well, my first husband was in advertising, and so they had
my brother worked at
right,
the
and that's
same
how
agency.
that's how I first knew Alan too.
Yep.
But I was going to ask you guys beyond me,
Don't you just love Baltimore?
I do, Smaltimore indeed. Talk to us a little
Absolutely.
about some of the other stuff. I know we were talking a little before the show started about some changes happening, I think, out of Utah. You may want to comment a little on Ravens, maybe the NCAA, the basketball tournament. Give us what, all the sports stuff we're hungering for.
I think we got the perfect guy on to talk about a story that might not have hit the radar late last night. But Gary Stein, you know that Ryan Odom is leaving UMBC. He was the coach that led the most miraculous one-game upset in basketball history beating Virginia, a 16 beating a 1. He's going out to Utah State. What can you tell us about that, Gary?
Well, I think, first of all, I think you can make the argument that Ryan Odom probably made the single biggest impact on local college basketball ever in the city of Baltimore with that win, the number 16 UMBC team beating number 1 Virginia back in 2018. Ryan Odom is a great guy. He's a family man. He spent 5 years here in Baltimore at UMBC, building up a program that literally was among the worst 2 or 3 programs in the NCAA. I'm not hyperbolizing it. There are 355 Division I basketball programs in the country. And for 7 years, between 2009 and 2016, UMBC was consistently ranked 352nd, 353rd, or 354th, or 355th. They were bad. He completely 1000% turned that around.
But
and he turned it around in 2 years.
But the radio broadcasts were number 1 during that time.
No,
Gary
no
Stein
doubt about
was
it,
doing the
Stanley.
radio broadcast.
Thank you. But so the impact that he put on UMBC and also, of course, on local Baltimore is immeasurable. Having said that,
how do you think they'll approach searching for a candidate, Gary?
It's going to be a national search. There's no doubt. It was a national search when they hired Ryan. Ryan actually was an underdog to get the job. But I think this is just my personal opinion. I think the type of coach, the characteristics of the coach that they would be looking for would be a highly thought of assistant at a very successful Power 5 school that would want to come down to the mid-major level and start to build his resume up as a head coach. And I think that's what they're going to try to do. Again, national search, surprises happen, people become available, etc. But I think that's the profile that UMBC would want to try to use here to find their next guy.
Hey, I have a question for both you all. So I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, which is known as a great college basketball town. The late Lute Olson, Steve Kerr. I used to be sitting in the stands when he would make his 3-pointers. And the Lady Cats got all the way to the national championship, almost won, but they lost to Stanford. And you know, any thoughts on women's college basketball? Because there's some great games out there.
Yeah, there are. Stan, if I could just jump in real quick on this one.
Go right ahead.
I'm very, what's the word I'm looking for? Pleased is one word. I'm a little bit surprised, in my opinion, how quickly, and you can disagree, how quickly women's college basketball has ramped up its competitive level. I'm not saying that women's college basketball hasn't been around for a long time. It has. But the athletes that are being produced now by the high schools and the clubs and the youth programs that get to college, and I know there's a WNBA, but I'm going to tell you that there are certain athletes now that I believe are actually capable of competing with the men, like on a game-by-game basis. I'm not talking about a kicker, you know, to kick extra points or something like that. The level of competition in women's athletics in general has increased so dramatically and so beautifully over the last 5 to 10 years that I think that actually the playing field is being equaled or is starting to equal out. Stanley, what do you think?
I wouldn't go quite that far, but certainly the product that we watch now in women's basketball is highly entertaining. And I think for a lot of men to be able to say that and sit back and watch a women's college game 10 years ago, 15 years ago, just wouldn't have been possible. I don't think it's sort of any longer an embarrassment to say I like women's college basketball. I have not attended a pro game, but I like women's college basketball. I watch it a fair amount of time. Very disappointed that our Lady Terps got knocked out when they did, because I thought they had a real good shot at winning the championship.
All right. Thank you.
So guys, any other stuff? I threw out Ravens. I threw out the NCAA championships. You want to weigh in on any of that?
Well, I think first of all, the game that we saw on Saturday night, the overtime game between UCLA and Gonzaga, I thought was one of the best college basketball games, if not the best game that I've ever seen in terms of competitiveness. But it's funny, you flip forward to Monday night, last night's game. I would say that Baylor's game was one of the most perfect executions of a game plan. And it was maybe one of the finest basketball games I've ever seen played by one team. Their defensive pressure was just absolutely put a stranglehold on the highest scoring team in the country's ability to score easy points. That team did battle back to get in the game barely, and then Baylor's dominance just showed the way in the second half. It was a remarkable performance by the Baylor Bears in winning their first ever national championship.
I think people were calling, before the game against Baylor, I think people were calling Gonzaga perhaps the greatest college basketball team of all time. Well, if you believe that going into the game, then you have to certainly agree that Baylor would be the best college basketball team of all time. I don't know if that's true or not, but I will tell you that I agree with Stan. The athleticism and the tenacity that Baylor played with last night, I don't think I've ever seen matched before. They were on every offensive rebound, on every loose ball. They answered every challenge that Gonzaga presented them when they whittled the lead down. And it was quite a performance last night.
The domination on the boards was absolutely stunning. I mean, it was like Gonzaga couldn't get rebound for half that game, Gary.
Yeah, they were, like I said, the tenacity that they had. I can't remember a team in a game that I've seen where one team was as tenacious as Baylor was last night.
Just one quick thing. I know we're probably up against time. Not that Gary and I gotta go, but the next thing we'll turn our attention to here locally will be the NFL draft. And yesterday, on a show that we do over on the press box side, Glenn Clark's show, I sat in for Glenn Clark, and Gary, we had on Terrace, like a terrace in the back porch, Terrace Marshall Jr. From LSU, a wide receiver. He has been mocked to the Ravens in the last three Mel Kiper mock drafts, and apparently Todd McShay has him going to the Ravens in his most recent draft. He's a good kid, called Kyle Ottenheimer and I sir every time we asked a question, and he was answering it. But that's the next big thing on our list here is the NFL draft that comes up at the end of April.
It's certainly true, and I think wide receiver is obviously a position of need for the Ravens. I've long been an advocate of the Ravens getting that wide receiver. I know they picked up Sammy Watkins in the offseason, but that's okay. I mean, I think he's got, if he's got some legs, he's got some juice. But we'll see. He's had an injury-marked career. But I think they need a young receiver, maybe a little bit more physical than Hollywood Brown, to be able to grow and mature with Lamar. I've heard a lot of talk about the Ravens not extending Lamar, maybe trading Lamar, getting something for Lamar because Lamar can't do it, et cetera. I think that's just crazy.
Yeah,
you don't let go perhaps one of the greatest athletes ever to suit up in terms of football. You don't let him go after 3 or 4 years. So I think they got to find somebody to grow with him, and I think they can grow together. I really like what this team is doing, and I think they've got a really long-term great future continued in the NFL.
Wonderful. Beth, why don't we have you start wrapping us up?
Okay, guys, I just want to say, I'm sorry I didn't call you sir, but since you now know that I'm so much older, you can start calling me ma'am, I guess. But
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyway, thank you guys so much. It is always such a fun time to be with you. And as you'll hear in my closing, we are going to be taking a hiatus for the summer, but we will definitely schedule you guys for the fall because we'll need an update on sports and we'll know a lot more about what has happened over the summer months. So thanks again so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I also want to tell our whole audience that on April 21st, the Associated is having a very special community event featuring Emmy Award winner and one of America's Got Talent's most memorable contestants, and that's mentalist Oz Perlman. You can go to associated.org/community event to learn more. And next week, as you probably know, is Yom HaZikaron, Israel Memorial Day, and also Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. So please join us as we celebrate Israel with our special guests next Tuesday on The Upside. And as I said, we want to let you know that we will be winding down our Upside season at the end of April. We hope to see you for our final 3 episodes before we take a summer break. In the meantime, as usual, we suggest you visit associated.org and jmoreliving.com. There's always information, stories, and resources. And sign up for the weekly newsletter. See you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.